Gianna is 72, a retired teacher who once carried the same energy as the children she guided. Her mornings were simple: coffee with milk, a sweet drizzle in her oatmeal, a warm glass at night when sleep refused to come. To her, milk had always been the comfort thread woven through life's fabric, a symbol of warmth and nourishment. But one winter morning, as she climbed the short flight of stairs to her garden, her chest tightened and her breath grew shallow. She laughed it off at first, telling her daughter she was simply out of shape, but deep down, she felt a quiet fear she could not explain. The real turning point came during a routine checkup when her doctor leaned in and said gently, "Gianna, your heart is working harder than it should. We need to look closely at what you're putting on your table each day." Those words sat heavy on her chest the way no staircase ever had. For a woman who prided herself on balance and discipline, it was unsettling to realize the very foods she thought were harmless, familiar, even wholesome, were quietly working against her. She went home that day carrying a mixture of disbelief and sadness, as though her past comforts had suddenly betrayed her. That night she opened her refrigerator with new eyes. The cartons and cans she had trusted for decades suddenly seemed foreign. Whole milk reminded her of her childhood breakfasts with her mother. Sweetened, condensed milk took her back to Sunday gatherings when her husband would drizzle it over fresh fruit. Rice milk, which she had chosen later in life believing it was lighter, now stood in the corner, innocent in appearance yet suddenly suspicious. Gianna placed her hand on the cool edge of the fridge and felt the weight of memory pressing against the reality of her health. The days that followed were not easy. Gianna felt torn between her love for tradition and the whisper of truth she could no longer ignore. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at her coffee cup, wondering if it was the drink itself or the milk she added that made her heart beat just a little too fast. She thought of her students, now grown, who used to giggle about how she always carried a thermos of warm tea, and she wondered if perhaps she needed to return to simpler habits. Her daughter urged her gently, "Mama, maybe it's time to try something new. Not less comforting, just kinder to you." In that moment, Gianna understood this was not about abandoning the tastes of her past. It was about protecting the days she still had ahead. Each sip, each choice had the power to either cloud her memory, burden her heart, or quietly nourish her from within. And so her journey began, not with a drastic change, but with a single decision to listen, truly listen, to what her body had been trying to tell her all along. She promised herself that the next glass she poured would not only comfort her spirit, but also honor the years of life still waiting for her. Gianna always began her mornings the same way. The sun filtered softly through her curtains, her kitchen clock ticked steadily, and she reached for the carton of whole milk she had trusted since childhood. She poured it into her coffee, the steam rising like an old friend's whisper. For her, this routine was as natural as breathing. Yet one crisp morning, when she took a sip and tried to climb the stairs to her garden, her chest felt heavy and her breath caught short. She stopped midway, hand pressed against the rail, wondering why something so small felt like such a burden. At first, she brushed it off. "It's just age," she told herself, as though the number 72 carried enough weight to explain every ache and stumble. But later that week, as she carried groceries up her driveway, the same pressure returned, a strange heaviness that made her pause, set the bags down, and steady herself before continuing. Her daughter noticed the change, the slower pace, the shallow breaths, and gently asked if she was all right. Gianna smiled, as mothers often do when they want to protect their children, and said, "Just a little tired, dear." But deep inside, she knew this tiredness felt different. The turning point arrived at a routine doctor's visit. Dr. Nguyen, a kind-eyed physician who had known her for years, listened closely as Gianna explained her strange fatigue. He leaned back in his chair and spoke with quiet seriousness. "Gianna, your heart is working harder than it should. And sometimes the foods we believe are safest, comforts from our youth, are the ones quietly making it worse." His words landed heavily, as though he had unlocked a secret she hadn't wanted to face. She thought of her coffee, her nightly glass of milk, the bowls of porridge she prepared with cream. Suddenly, all the memories attached to those simple acts felt tainted by worry. That evening, Gianna sat alone at her table, the carton of whole milk resting before her. She stared at the label, the familiar cow, the promise of strength it had always seemed to carry. Her mother had believed in it, her children had grown up with it, and her grandchildren still drank it without question. But Dr. Nguyen's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her that what had once been a gift might now be a hidden thief. She remembered his mention of cholesterol, of arteries stiffening with age, of silent risks building until one day they could no longer be ignored. She had never thought of milk as dangerous, and yet here she was, afraid of the very glass she once cradled for comfort. The next morning, she hesitated. She reached for the carton, then stopped. Her hand hovered over the fridge handle as she whispered aloud, "Not today." Instead, she brewed her coffee black, tasting the bitterness she had always masked with cream. It wasn't pleasant, but it felt like a declaration, a first step into a different kind of care. She realized that every choice carried weight now, that what she poured into her cup mattered not just for flavor, but for the rhythm of her heart, the strength of her legs, the clarity of her mind. For Gianna, the shift was not only about removing whole milk, it was about recognizing that age does not excuse discomfort, that the whispers of her body were not just signs of growing older, but warnings that deserved to be heard. That morning, she poured the milk down the sink, watching it swirl into nothingness, and with it, she released decades of blind trust. The sound of the drain gurgling was strangely final, like closing a chapter she had read too many times. As she rinsed the empty glass, she felt both loss and relief. Loss because memories are hard to surrender, especially when they carry the faces of loved ones long gone. Relief because the decision marked a new beginning, a chance to protect the days still waiting ahead. And somewhere in the quiet of her kitchen, Gianna made a promise to herself. She would not let comfort disguise itself as harm again. The milk was only the beginning, and though she did not yet know what she would replace it with, she knew one thing for certain: her health, her future, and her family's peace of mind mattered more than any tradition in a carton. Gianna had always carried a sweet tooth, though she never admitted it with pride. For her, sweetness wasn't about indulgence, it was about memory. She could still picture her late husband on Sunday afternoons, spooning thick ribbons of sweetened condensed milk over sliced mango, laughing as the grandchildren licked their spoons with delight. The can, small but potent, had become part of family rituals. To Gianna, opening it was like opening a window to the past. The golden syrup was comfort, celebration, and love, all swirled into one. But in the weeks after her doctor's warning, something shifted. She noticed things she had once overlooked. Her mind, sharp for most of her life, had begun to betray her in small, unsettling ways. She would set her glasses down in one room and wander through the house in confusion. Words sometimes floated just out of reach, leaving her mid-sentence with a silence that made her cheeks flush. "It's just age," she whispered to herself again and again, clinging to the idea that this fog was natural. But deep inside, a thread of worry wound tighter with each lapse. One evening, after serving dessert with her daughter and grandchildren, she retreated to the quiet of her kitchen. The can of condensed milk sat on the counter, sticky at the edges, and she stared at it as if it were an intruder. Her daughter's voice still lingered in her ear. "Mama, you've seemed forgetful lately. Are you sure you're okay?" Gianna had brushed it aside with a smile, but the question pierced her. She remembered what Dr. Nguyen had said about sugar, how it could inflame blood vessels, strain the heart, and even cloud the brain. And suddenly, the connection felt undeniable. That night, she lay awake, her mind replaying the day's moments in fragments. The laughter of her grandchildren, the taste of sweetness on her tongue, the fog in her head when she tried to recall a simple name. It felt as though each memory carried two sides, joy and danger. She thought about Alzheimer's being called type 3 diabetes, about the way sugar fed not only the body's cravings, but also its decline. The realization was heavy. This wasn't just about sweetness anymore. It was about her independence, her clarity, the part of herself she feared losing most. The next morning, Gianna opened her cupboard and held the small can in her hands. Its label was bright and familiar, a loyal companion over decades. She traced her finger along the rim and whispered, "You've given me love, but you've taken from me too." She thought of the times she had felt sluggish after dessert, the heaviness in her stomach, the restless nights she blamed on stress. How many of those moments had been quiet warnings she had ignored? She couldn't know for certain, but she knew enough now to act. With a deep breath, she placed the can back on the shelf, not out of sight, but as a challenge to herself. That day, when she stirred her coffee, she reached instead for a drop of cinnamon, inhaling its warm fragrance. It wasn't the same, but it carried its own kind of comfort, lighter, kinder, and without the fog that had begun to shadow her days. The sweetness of habit lingered in her memory, but the clarity of her choice felt sharper. For the first time in weeks, she smiled not because of what she was tasting, but because of what she was choosing to protect. Later, when her daughter visited, Gianna served coffee without the heavy sweetness, adding only a gentle splash of warmth. "It's different," her daughter said, taking a sip, "but it's nice. Feels cleaner." Gianna nodded, her heart swelling with quiet pride. This wasn't about denying pleasure, it was about reshaping it, transforming it into something that would not rob her of herself. She thought of her grandchildren, of the way they looked at her with trust, and she knew she wanted to remain present, clear, and strong for as long as she could. That night, as she prepared for bed, Gianna noticed something remarkable. Her thoughts flowed more easily. She remembered where she had left her glasses, and she drifted into sleep without the usual heaviness in her chest. It was not a miracle, but it was a beginning. The can of condensed milk still waited in the cupboard, but its power over her was gone. Gianna had chosen clarity over comfort, presence over sweetness, and in that choice, she discovered a new kind of nourishment, the nourishment of a mind and heart finally freed from the weight of sugar's embrace. For a while, Gianna felt proud of herself. She had let go of the whole milk that weighed down her chest and the sweet, condensed milk that clouded her mind. Each morning, she reached for her coffee with quiet resolve. Each evening, she settled into bed with a little more peace. Yet there was still one carton she leaned on, one she believed was safe: rice milk. It stood in the corner of her fridge like a trusted ally, smooth and light, a choice she had made years ago when she first suspected her stomach no longer tolerated dairy well. Rice milk is better, she often told herself, repeating it like a mantra. It was plant-based, easy to digest, and didn't leave her bloated like dairy sometimes did. To her, it felt like a small triumph, a healthier alternative she had chosen with intention. When her daughter would ask about her diet, Gianna would proudly hold up the carton and smile, as if the choice alone proved she was taking care of herself. But the truth has a way of finding us, even when we're certain we're doing the right thing. The moment came one quiet afternoon at the library. Gianna had joined a seniors book club, and after their discussion, one of the women began talking about food labels, about hidden dangers even in healthy products. Gianna leaned in as the woman mentioned rice milk, speaking about something called arsenic. The word hit Gianna like a cold gust of wind. She felt her chest tighten, not from walking this time, but from the sudden fear that something she trusted could be poisoning her slowly. That evening, she sat in her kitchen, the rice milk carton before her, much like she had once stared at the whole milk. She read the label carefully, but nowhere did it mention arsenic or toxins. It only spoke of purity, of natural grains and water. She wanted desperately to believe the words, but Dr. Nguyen's gentle warning still lived in her memory. Sometimes the foods we think are safest are the ones quietly working against us. She poured herself a glass, the pale liquid pooling like innocence in her cup. She sipped, but the taste suddenly felt hollow, as though her tongue had caught on a lie. That night, she dreamt of her bones. She saw herself walking in the garden, but her legs felt brittle, fragile, as if the earth beneath her might crack them. She woke with her heart racing, the dream lingering like a shadow she couldn't shake. The next day, she called her daughter, her voice trembling as she confessed, "I thought I was doing something good with this rice milk, but now I'm not so sure." Her daughter listened patiently, then replied, "Mama, you've already proven you can change. Maybe this is just another step forward." Encouraged, Gianna began to search, not for facts in books or numbers on charts, but for what her body had been telling her all along. She realized that whenever she drank rice milk, her energy dipped. She felt lighter for a moment, but soon after, she grew weary, as if her body had been fed air instead of fuel. She noticed her hands shaking slightly when she skipped protein in meals, her muscles aching longer after simple chores. She began to see rice milk not as a comfort, but as an emptiness, something that gave nothing while quietly taking away. One morning, she stood before the fridge and whispered, "No more lies." She lifted the carton and poured it down the drain, the sound echoing through the kitchen like the end of another chapter. This time, she didn't feel sorrow. Instead, she felt strength, because the act wasn't just about letting go of rice milk, but about releasing the illusion that light always meant healthy. For Gianna, it was a deeper shift, a promise to question, to listen, and to choose foods that truly nourished her body rather than simply soothe her mind. Later that week, she visited her daughter and found herself laughing more easily, her steps steadier. She spoke of her change not with regret, but with pride. "I thought I was protecting myself, she admitted, but now I see that health isn't about choosing what looks safe. It's about knowing what truly gives back. Her daughter squeezed her hand, eyes soft with admiration, and in that touch, Gianna felt affirmed. She was not weak for letting go. She was strong for choosing again and again, even when it meant rewriting habits of a lifetime. As she walked home that evening, the cool air filling her lungs, Gianna realized something profound. Every sip, every bite, every choice was no longer about clinging to the past, but about embracing the future. Rice milk had been a quiet deception, but her awareness had become her shield. And in that awareness, she discovered a power greater than habit, the power to shape her own tomorrow. By the time Gianna let go of rice milk, she felt lighter, more certain of herself. Each change, though small, had stitched together a sense of confidence she hadn't felt in years. Still, she wasn't ready to abandon the comfort of milk entirely. During a grocery trip with her daughter, she noticed the shelves lined with colorful cartons, vanilla oat milk, chocolate almond milk, even coconut blends with bright, cheerful labels. They practically called her name. These must be better, she thought, plant-based, fortified, packaged with promises of health. She reached for one with the word heart-friendly printed boldly across the front, smiling at the thought that perhaps she had finally found her balance. That night, she poured herself a glass of the vanilla almond milk, the scent rich and indulgent. It reminded her of desserts she once adored, of the little vanilla cakes she used to bake for her students. The sweetness felt innocent, like a treat that carried no guilt. Yet after finishing it, she noticed something familiar, the heaviness in her belly, the fog in her head. She tossed and turned in bed, her sleep restless, her heart beating with a nervous rhythm. By morning, she awoke tired, with the memory of sweetness lingering bitterly. Her daughter, noticing her sluggishness over breakfast, asked, "Mama, what did you drink last night?" Gianna hesitated, embarrassed to admit she had fallen for another health promise. But she finally confessed, pointing to the carton. Her daughter frowned, gently turning the label toward her. "Look at the sugar, Mama. 10 grams per cup." Gianna blinked in disbelief. 10 grams. It didn't sound like much, but she thought of the coffee she'd added it to, the late-night glass she'd sipped, and suddenly realized she had taken in more sugar than she used to allow her grandchildren. Her chest grew heavy with shame. She had worked so hard to free herself from condensed milk, from habits that drained her clarity, only to be tricked again. She remembered Dr. Nguyen's words, remembered the way sugar inflamed not only the body but also the mind. And here she was, still inviting it in, only now, disguised under the mask of healthy. The betrayal stung, not because of the carton, but because of her own longing for sweetness, her own willingness to believe what she wanted to hear. That afternoon, she returned to the kitchen, held the carton in her hands, and whispered, "Not this time." She poured the liquid into the sink, the sugary scent rising before vanishing down the drain. For the first time, she didn't feel sadness or loss. She felt anger. Anger that so many products preyed on people like her, offering comfort wrapped in poison. But beneath the anger was determination. If sweetness was her weakness, then clarity had to be her shield. The following week, Gianna found herself back at the store. This time, her eyes skipped the bright flavors and cheerful promises. Instead, she reached for something simple, a plain, unsweetened almond milk. The label was quiet, unpretentious, almost dull compared to the others. But when she poured it into her glass at home, the first sip surprised her. It was light, almost too light, but it didn't weigh her down. It didn't fog her mind. It simply slipped through her body without resistance, like water carrying a faint whisper of nuts. Over the next few days, she began to notice subtle shifts. Her mornings felt steadier, her afternoons less sluggish. The bitterness of black coffee softened with the almond milk's gentleness, and her oatmeal tasted cleaner, less heavy. Even her sleep grew calmer, as if her body finally rested without the jittery waves of hidden sugar. One evening, as she sat with her daughter, she said softly, "It's not sweet, but it feels right. It doesn't fight me the way the others did." Her daughter smiled and replied, "Maybe sweetness isn't what you need anymore, Mama. Maybe lightness is." The words sank deep, echoing through Gianna's heart. She realized that her journey wasn't about replacing loss with imitation. It was about finding new comforts that aligned with the woman she had become, not the girl she once was. As she placed the carton of unsweetened almond milk back into her fridge, Gianna felt a new sense of trust, not in the label, but in herself. She had learned to see beyond promises, beyond memories, beyond the sweetness that had once held her captive. And in its place, she found something gentler, something kinder, something that gave without taking away. It wasn't about giving up joy, it was about redefining it. And that, she realized, was the truest nourishment of all. Gianna had always prided herself on being steady. As a teacher, she could stand on her feet all day, bending to help children with their handwriting, walking the aisles between desks, carrying books tucked under her arm. But in recent years, that steadiness had begun to waver. Sometimes, while reaching for something on a high shelf, she would feel her balance slip just enough to scare her. Other times, she noticed her legs aching after only a short walk. She dismissed it at first, chalking it up to just age, the same phrase she had leaned on for too many of her troubles. But deep down, a whisper of fear grew. What if her bones were no longer as strong as she believed? That fear became real one chilly afternoon when she nearly lost her footing on the steps outside her house. She caught herself, clinging to the railing, but the jolt left her trembling. Her daughter rushed to her side, eyes wide with worry. "Mama, you have to be careful. One fall could change everything." The words stung, not because they weren't true, but because Gianna had seen it happen. Friends her age who had fallen, broken a hip, and never truly recovered. She thought of them often in the quiet hours, their independence slipping away with the crack of a bone. Later, during a follow-up visit, Dr. Nguyen spoke gently about bone health. He reminded her that after 60, bone loss accelerates, making fractures more dangerous and recovery more difficult. "Gianna," he said, his voice steady, "your bones are like the foundation of a home. They hold everything together. You must feed them what they need, not just what feels comforting." His words lingered, echoing with both warning and hope. That evening, she stood in her kitchen, staring at the shelf where her almond milk sat. It had been a good change, gentle, light, safe. But Dr. Nguyen's voice reminded her that gentleness alone might not be enough. She needed strength. She needed something that would not only soothe, but also fortify. The next day at the market, she lingered longer than usual in the milk aisle, her eyes scanning past the colorful cartons until they landed on one that read, "Calcium-fortified oat milk." She hesitated, running her fingers along the box. Oats reminded her of mornings with porridge, of comfort that carried no sharp edges. The idea that this simple drink could also help her bones felt almost too good to be true. Still, she placed it in her basket, whispering quietly to herself, "It's worth a try." That night, she warmed a glass before bed, watching the steam curl into the air. The first sip was mild, smooth, almost sweet in its simplicity. It didn't weigh her down, didn't fight her stomach, didn't cloud her mind. Instead, it felt like a gentle embrace, steady and calming. For the first time in months, she drifted to sleep without tossing or turning, the comfort of oat milk cradling her into rest. Over the weeks that followed, Gianna began to notice subtle changes. Her mornings felt steadier, her body less achy after her walks. She still moved carefully, still held the railing when stepping outside, but there was a quiet confidence in her stride. And in the evenings, when sleep came more easily, she felt her body thanking her for the small gift she had chosen. It wasn't a miracle, it was nourishment, a whisper of strength rebuilding her from within. Her daughter noticed too. One afternoon, as they worked together in the garden, Gianna bent down to plant a row of flowers without the usual groan of pain. Her daughter smiled and said, "You seem stronger these days, Mama. What changed?" Gianna laughed softly, wiping the dirt from her hands. "Maybe it's just the milk," she said, though she knew it was more than that. It was the choice to listen, to adapt, to believe that even at 72, she could build a future that was sturdier than her fears. That night, as she sipped her oat milk before bed, Gianna reflected on how far she had come. Whole milk, condensed milk, rice milk, they had all held her in comfort, but each had chipped away at her strength in quiet ways. Now she felt herself reclaiming what she thought she had lost. Not just bone and balance, but the assurance that her life was still hers to protect. The glass in her hand was no longer just a drink, it was a promise to herself, a reminder that resilience could be found in the gentlest of places. By now, Gianna had grown accustomed to change. Each shift, though painful at first, had brought her new clarity. Whole milk, condensed milk, rice milk, even the flavored varieties, she had released them one by one, trading nostalgia for strength, sweetness for steadiness, illusion for truth. Oat milk had soothed her nights, almond milk had lightened her mornings. But still, she sensed her journey wasn't finished. There was something missing, something her body kept whispering about in the stiffness of her knees, in the way her hands ached after tending the garden. One morning, as she walked with her neighbor Lucia, their conversation turned to aching joints. Lucia, sprightly though nearly the same age, spoke with surprising optimism. "I've been drinking flax milk," she said with a knowing smile. "It's not common, but it helps with inflammation. My knees don't shout at me the way they used to." The name lingered in Gianna's mind all day. Flax. She remembered her grandmother sprinkling flax seeds into bread dough, calling them the grains that heal. Could it be that simple? Curiosity led her back to the market. She searched the shelves until her eyes landed on the carton, tucked away quietly among the more popular brands. It wasn't flashy. No bright flavors or bold promises, just the simple word, flax. Gianna lifted it carefully, almost reverently, and read the back. Words like omega-3, anti-inflammatory, and heart health stood out. She thought of her stiff joints, of the way her memory sometimes blurred, of her daughter's hand steadying her at the stairs. She whispered to herself, "Maybe this is the one I've been waiting for." That evening, she poured a glass and held it thoughtfully before tasting. It was light, creamy, softer than she expected. It carried none of the heaviness of dairy, none of the artificial sweetness of flavored milks, just clean, gentle nourishment. As it slipped down her throat, she felt no rush, no crash, only calm. She closed her eyes, imagining the omega-3s quietly flowing through her, soothing the silent fires of inflammation, softening the edges of her body's aches. Over the weeks that followed, Gianna noticed a change that felt less dramatic, but more profound. Her mornings were not without stiffness, but the ache in her knees loosened more quickly, and she could tend her flowers without needing to sit as often. Her hands, once quick to throb after cooking or sewing, seemed more cooperative. Even her mood carried a lift, as though the weight of discomfort had eased just enough to let joy shine through again. And perhaps most remarkable was the clarity of her thoughts. Names came more quickly, conversations flowed more easily, and she found herself laughing without the fog that once muted her joy. One evening, sitting with her daughter on the porch, Gianna spoke softly. "I used to think aging meant surrendering, to pain, to forgetfulness, to weakness, but maybe it's not about surrender. Maybe it's about choosing differently, little by little, until the body feels heard again." Her daughter squeezed her hand, eyes glistening with quiet pride. "Mama, you've taught me more about strength in these months than in all my years of school. You're still the teacher." The words warmed Gianna's heart. She realized that her journey wasn't only about milk or about health. It was about reclaiming her power to decide. Every carton she had poured down the sink wasn't just a rejection, it was a declaration. "I am still here, still choosing, still shaping my future." Flax milk wasn't a miracle cure, but it was a symbol of that choice, a reminder that even at 72, she could still learn, adapt, and grow. That night, as she sipped a warm glass before bed, she thought of her husband, of her students, of the countless mornings and evenings that had passed in quiet rituals. She felt their memory not as loss, but as strength, guiding her into the present. Her body was older, yes, but her spirit was awake, alive, and deeply grateful. The stars glimmered outside her window, and for the first time in a long while, she whispered with certainty, "Tomorrow is mine to keep." And with that final sip, Gianna's journey found its peace, not in clinging to the past, but in embracing the simple, nourishing choices that gave her future its light. Gianna's story began with the familiar, a glass of milk she thought was harmless, a sweetness she thought was comforting. Yet those same habits were quietly stealing her breath, fogging her mind, and weakening her strength. Bit by bit, she chose differently. She let go of what weighed her down, and in doing so, she discovered that even at 72, transformation is not only possible, it's powerful. Her greatest change wasn't simply in what she poured into her glass. It was in the way she listened to her body, in the courage to question long-held comforts, and in the strength to say, "Not this time." With each decision, abandoning whole milk, releasing condensed milk, trading rice milk for true nourishment, she rebuilt herself in quiet but undeniable ways. She found lightness in almond milk, steadiness in oat milk, and in flax milk, a new companion that soothed her joints, sharpened her mind, and reminded her that age need not mean decline. Gianna's journey invites us to reflect on our own. The habits we carry from childhood, the foods we cling to for memory's sake, Are they truly serving us, or are they quietly holding us back? Perhaps the greatest gift we can give ourselves and those who love us is the willingness to choose again. So let Gianna's courage be your gentle reminder. Every sip, every bite, every choice is a chance to protect the days still waiting ahead. Aging is not surrender, it is an invitation to grow wiser in how we care for ourselves. And as Gianna learned, the simplest glass can hold not just nourishment, but hope. Here's to strong bones, clear minds, and the promise of tomorrow shining bright with possibility.